they're really looking for somebody who can come in and say, here's how it works. They know they need what they don't have today. They don't have innovation. They don't have leadership in marketing, but they don't know how to buy it. So the idea that, that somebody can walk in and say, here's how it works, I think is really a great positioning as well.
Welcome to the Agency Profit Podcast, a show dedicated to going deep space on agency operations, which is just as nerdy as it sounds. I'm your host, Marcel I'm the CEO of Parakeeto, a firm that helps digital and creative agencies measure and improve their profitability. Join me as I interview some of the smartest thought leaders and agency owners in our space and go deep into operations, metrics, and all the other things you need to get right so you can spend less time worrying about operations and more time executing on your vision. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Agency Profit Podcast. We have a repeat guest joining us today, somewhat of a legend of the industry and author of 4 books, best known probably for duct tape marketing, the whole duct tape marketing ecosystem, the framework of the book, the certification process, all of that. So John Jantsch, thank you for joining us again on the show today.
Hey, Marcel, I'm glad to be back. It's been a while.
It's been too long, my friend. You have been busy since we last spoke, and most recently did some very interesting research that we're going to talk about today. But before we dig into all of that, for those that maybe aren't familiar with who you are and what you do, why don't you share what it is that you do?
Well, I've been doing it for a long time, so I've tried to compact this, but I started my own agency about 30 years ago, but it was really more like, hey, I can hustle work. How hard could this be? That was my plan. And I did, I got big projects, little projects, big companies, little companies, as clients. And I found a few years in that I really enjoyed working with those smaller kind of bootstrapped companies, but they were really tough. I mean, the way I had been trained classically, it was tough to work with them. They had the same problems and challenges, never the same budgets, never even the same attention span. So I really, about 10 years into my journey, decided I was going to just try a whole new approach. I was going to walk into a business and say, look, here's what I'm going to do. Here's what you're going to do. Here's the results we hope to get. Here's what it costs. We're going to start with strategy before tactics. I'm going to install a marketing system. And turns out trying to solve my frustration, that was kind of music to their ears. The one of the things that I've seen for small and mid-sized businesses, and it's gotten harder, I think with each passing years, it's tough to buy marketing services. I mean, it's certainly gotten more complex in terms of the amount of platforms, but everybody's selling the idea of the week. Who do you trust? A lot of people are selling, just tactics that aren't really attached to business objectives or a marketing strategy. And so the fact that somebody was talking strategy before tactics and they knew what it was going to cost, I think was really the secret to duct tape marketing. And that name, by the way, was really what I called my system, my approach. And people seem to like it. And so I attached it to pretty much everything that I do. It was, as you mentioned, the name of my first book and my podcast, my website, my business. And now we have a network of, well over 400 agencies that have actually gone through our certification program to really kind of learn our approach to strategy and license our approach to strategy to work with their clients.
Awesome. And so that takes us to today where you have this perspective now in the industry. Yeah. You get to see a lot, what's going on across, these 400 plus agencies. And that has led you to getting into something that I admire and appreciate. A lot of people have asked us to do it. We have not done it because I know how much work it is. And that is doing industry research and trying to aggregate data about what's happening in the industry. Tell us a little bit about the most recent research project that you've done.
Well, so one of the things that I have seen, it hasn't really changed our approach at all. I mean, we've always led with strategy. We've always had kind of a CMO mindset when we work with our clients. But I've really seen a lot of movement towards the idea of a fractional CMOs. And we can talk about the reasons for that. But we've kind of leaned very heavily into that positioning as well to help agencies, consultants, folks that are just trying to get started, embrace that positioning. So I just really thought, I get these emails from, Adobe and all these other different companies, doing CMO, research. And I thought, nobody's done one that I've seen, at least on fractional CMOs. And so I actually teamed up with, you talked about the hard part. I got a little help. I teamed up with ActiveCampaign and DataBox to do the research. And so we surveyed well over 200 folks that identified as fractional CMOs. And we did the kind of at the same time, a branch survey of folks that have hired fractional CMOs companies. And so we wanted to get kind of both sides of the coin, if you will, to see if there was, if we were missing things, if there were trends, if there were surprises in it. It did a lot of validating, frankly, of things that I've seen because I've worked with so many folks. But it's a fun project.
Well, and I was interested to have you on. You reached out about some of this research that you had done. And I was interested in this because I think this is really just for the audience. We're talking about this specific positioning of fractional CMO, but I think a lot of the insight, especially the stuff that you extracted from the client side, we can abstract that away from that specific positioning. And I think draw a lot in terms of what people are valuing, especially in that more small business space. So with that primer in mind, why don't we start by defining what is a fractional CMO? How do you define that for the purpose of this research?
Well, I think the classic definition of somebody who is brought in part-time to define and orchestrate marketing inside of an organization. Again, part-time, orchestrate, bring in some leadership, bring in, be an advocate for the customer. I mean, there's a lot of things that I think actually go into it. But I think the keys there are it's a part-time person brought in at a high level in an organization to help them really manage and orchestrate their overarching marketing.
Yeah. And the majority of the people that you looked at that were surveyed, were these primarily consultants that were doing this solo or with a small team, or did you also have some larger firms that were kind of positioning themselves as fractional CMOs, but had a large organization around it?
So I would say the majority were actually solo folks, and it's it's kind of the typical, hey, I've got CMO-ish experience or 20 years in the industry of marketing. I don't want to do what I'm doing now, so I'm going to hang a shingle out and I'll sell a fourth of my time to 4 companies. And whatever they need, I'll fit into kind of their way of working. That to me is what that's been around for probably 10, 15 years. Frankly, that approach. We did it's a little harder to separate them out, but we certainly are starting to see and did get a percentage, probably about a quarter of the group were agencies that were, your traditional kind of agency that is saying, hey, we need to get more strategic. We need to actually be able to offer our clients something that they actually buy, known as strategy, as opposed to, because I think a lot of people, if they're being honest, they end up doing some things under they may not call it strategy, but I mean, if you're a web designer, you've got to do a little bit of strategic work just to get the product produced, right? But I think the idea that we're going to come in and offer leadership, marketing leadership inside of an organization as a set offering, I think that's something that folks are wrestling with, but I think they also realize we have to do something a little bit unique.
Yeah. And I think this is particularly relevant given, we were talking before the show, there's been pressure on margins in our industry for a long time, but it's not slowing down. If anything, the margin pressure is getting higher and higher. And it's especially indexed right now towards the execution side of things. I mean, agencies are now competing with ChatGPT, with Canva, with all of the design tools that are out there now augmented with AI. We're now competing against offshore companies all around the world. The world is getting very small and our access to talent in other geos is getting much better. And so there has been this pressure for firms to kind of pick a lane and say, am I going to compete on efficiency, or am I going to try to really carve out this more strategic relationship with clients? And so I think that really makes this an interesting point in time to be looking at this research more closely.
Yeah, no question. You and I it would take us about 10 minutes to find somebody to offer to do us a website for $100. So that makes it really tough. And I'm not suggesting that $100 website is anywhere near, what somebody who is, very talented and very experienced and, really digs deep can produce. But the problem is if the perception is that that's what you're competing with now. The market for the $25,000 website is just going to get a lot smaller.
Yeah. And so with that in mind, what are some of the most important insights that you drew from all of this research that you did as it relates to this problem of trying to establish a more strategic relationship with clients and positioning yourself to win that kind of a relationship?
So a couple of things. One of the questions was, what do you ascribe as the chief benefit to your agency or to your consultancy as positioning yourself as a fractional CMO or offering fractional CMO services? The number one, no shock here at all. It makes us more strategic as an agency. I mean, that I'm hopeful that would be the number one. But I tell you the one that didn't surprise me, but I was really glad to see it so high up, is that it changes our relationship, or it creates a better relationship with our clients. And I think that is that's one of the things that I've seen all along in offering strategy before tactics, is that it actually chases some people away. It's a niche, if you will, all on its own. But the people that it attracts are what I like to call investors. They realize the benefit of investing in that work, ahead of time. They clearly want strategy, as part of it. But in the process of doing that kind of work, we have to get deep into their psyche a little bit. We get into the books a little bit. I mean, we get into stuff that marketers aren't necessarily invited into when there's selling SEO services or something. And so it really allows you to move to that trusted advisor role pretty darn quickly. And I think we retain our clients for years. And I think that has a lot to do with it, is the way that we start the relationship, and maybe who we attract because of that, really leads to a lot of that.
Yeah. And of course, impacts of that, deeper relationship, more context, harder to replace all of those things, but also more pricing power in that kind of a relationship as well. Is that what you found in that research as well?
Absolutely. There's so much competition in the, I don't know what numbers make sense, $3,000 to $5,000 a month, kind of like packages that a lot of folks are selling. There's not so much at the, $20,000 strategy engagement that leads then to a, long-term retainer. And what we have found is that when you do that work on the front end, the strategy work, and again, this may go to, this is like this, is it cause or, causation, that we're attracting a client who then is not turning around and saying, okay, we just went through this amazing strategy thing, and I trust you and, to orchestrate, all the things that you propose. How much is it? It's literally like, what do we do next? And it's like you're executing the plan as opposed to what do I get for that? And I think that what we have found is that folks that take our approach, use it on the front end, all of a sudden are charging twice what they felt they could charge for some of those same sort of packages of services that, ultimately need to be done, pretty much for everybody.
Yeah. And so I'm interested in how that did or didn't align to the client side, which you also did some research on. Was there anything that you found that was surprising or unexpected when you talked to clients?
A couple things that were pretty obvious. I mean, I think that there was a little bit of selection that went on. If somebody has hired a fractional CMO, it probably already says something about, what they believe. So I think that in itself, was a little bit of, skewing the maybe some of the answers, because obviously these were companies that were looking for a more strategic approach from the marketing company they hired. I mean, there's no surprise there, but that's, if we interviewed the general public, I'm not sure that would be the answer, of what they were wanting. They just want more digital marketing or, more leads or something like that. But these guys, this group was looking, actively were, interested in investing in a strategic approach. The one thing that I thought was a little disconnect, and maybe this just goes to what agencies believe as opposed to what clients believe, because probably every agency owner has heard, this, like, how many people in our industry have you worked with? Right. I mean, it's like, they want to know that you know, SaaS or, healthcare or, whatever it is, in their industry. And I think that there is a belief from the client that that's really important. And I think there's a level of that that's important. But on the agency side or the fractional CMO side, they actually mentioned the idea that what was more important than that was a breadth of experience, that I've worked in a lot of industries. And I've actually always felt that that was true, that I know a lot of agencies really niche down. And, the thought on that is that, oh, if you've worked with these companies, you're going to know our industry inside and out. And I think that's actually a problem in some cases, because, I'm going to bring you the templated kind of warmed over stuff that, we've got our ad campaigns, locked and loaded. We know what all the keywords are, what all the campaigns need to be. You get this one. And I think that real innovation, which is something that I think a fractional CMO should bring, happens because I can say, you know what, in this industry, we do this. Why aren't we doing it over here? And I think, to me, I think that's a real value. And I think a lot of the fractional CMOs, put that as a kind of one of their top selling points as well, was that they had a lot of breadth of experience in a lot of industries.
Do you want some free resources to help you measure and improve your profitability? If you do, then I want to tell you about our agency profitability toolkit, which you can grab absolutely free in the show notes or by heading to parakeeto.com/toolkit. It's packed with training videos, cheat sheets, templates, and all kinds of other great resources to help you start measuring and improving the essential metrics that are going to drive better profitability in your business. And it's helped thousands of other agencies around the world do the same. So I want to encourage you to go and grab a copy of that. And if you'd rather get in the fast lane and just have our team of experts guide you through the process of measuring and improving your profitability, then I want to encourage you to apply for a consultation at parakeeto.com. And with that, I want to thank you again for tuning in. I hope you enjoy the episode, and I'll let you get back to it.
Yeah, it's really interesting because those two things are seen as being binary, or they're kind of mutually exclusive. But from my perspective, to your point, it's kind of a yes and question. There's this concept of the T-shaped human. And this is kind of the kind of skill set you want to develop in your career, where you have this sort of broad range of experience generally in the early part of your career, and then you build a lot of depth in one specific vertical. I think the same is probably true about an agency. There is value in being able to come in and save a lot of the process and learning because you have the experience. But to your point, being able to also apply your theories to other industries and see what's working there, you can bring some of that innovation in. And you also get to zero in on what about this is timeless and is agnostic, and what about this is industry specific, so that you're also able to adapt to changes more often. Because we're seeing it in the agency industry right now. Like the industry is maturing. And so there are just these like things that happen in every industry as they mature and margins get smaller. There's things that happen to the market. You have M&A, you have consolidation, you have internal specialization. All those things are happening here. And so if you have that broader perspective, you could recognize those patterns in ways that other firms might not, that have just been squarely focused on that industry the whole time.
And I think that that's, in some ways, I think that that's the skill AI will never develop. It is, I think everything else is on the table. I'm really curious, will there be video editors? Will there be copywriters? Again, I know that sounds ridiculous at this point, because we're certainly not there. But boy, just an improvement in the last 24 months in AI suggests where we could go. And so I don't think that context, and I don't think that sort of the human emotion will ever get there, or at least it's a long way away. And so I think that I think folks who have a lot of experience in strategy, that come with a strategic mindset, that get a lot of experience, frankly, because you get better at developing strategy the more things that you see and the more times that you do it. And I think that's going to be the master skill, that's really left when the dust settles.
So to come back to the research itself, if I'm an agency owner, I'm listening to this, what are some of the most important insights that I should be drawing from the information that you collected in this research?
Well, one of the things that that I was a little surprised. I think I said this before we started recording that I think we were years of experience in the industry, of the people that called themselves fractional CMOs, was somewhere in the, between 16 and 17 years of experience was the majority. Now, we didn't say, how many years have you been a fractional CMO? It was marketing experience. So theoretically, somebody could have been, in a number of junior roles, so to speak, before they did this. So it wasn't necessarily that telling. But personally, I think that was kind of staying where the industry is today. That it's been a lot of people that have had CMO experience that have been bold enough to say, I can call myself a fractional CMO. And I believe that you're going to see that come way down, that number of years of experience come way down. And that the reason for that, I think, is because the market is just growing. So, it used to be you had to be a $30 million company probably before you thought about hiring a fractional CMO, because you weren't quite there to hire a CMO. But, you definitely needed to start acting like a real big company, right? And so I think that's who used to hire, exclusively hire fractional CMOs. Well, we see people that get it, they may not call it a fractional CMO, but marketing leadership, strategy. We see companies now as small as $2 and $3 million that are saying, hey, I want to go here, and this is how I think I'm going to get there. So I think that years of experience, and it's funny because, you go on LinkedIn and talk about this stuff and you get, pushback from people that have been doing it for 20 years saying, oh, a bunch of rookies are getting into this now. It's not like it used to be. And I think that's only going to increase.
Yeah. What's interesting is that I think there's also a second component here, which is people like yourself, that the literature on and resources and education and certifications that are available today for somebody that maybe has 5 or 10 years of experience, really tactically, then understanding how to get a framework that is proven to go and develop a strategy in, a set of industries. That stuff is there as well. So I think that starts to pull the timeline, because you don't have to necessarily slog it for 20 years to figure that stuff out. You can buy that information pretty readily these days.
Yeah. And I think we definitely see that with people even that have a lot of experience, they just don't know where to start. Like, how do I put together, and what happens when you do that is you go to a company and say, I'm a fractional CMO. I've got all this experience. You need help. And then they design the job. And so, next thing you know, your fractional gig turns into like going to every one of their sales meetings. And, so even having the posture to be able to say, here's the scope, here's how I work. Here's what we're going to do first. Here's what we're going to do next. Because frankly, most of the people, at least that we're working with, they've never hired a fractional CMO. They certainly never hired a CMO. I mean, so they're really looking for somebody who can come in and say, here's how it works. They know they need what they don't have today. They don't have innovation. They don't have leadership in marketing, but they don't know how to buy it. So the idea that, that somebody can walk in and say, here's how it works, I think is really a great positioning as well.
There's no greater feeling as a business owner. This is what's so ironic is, as business owners, we know this innately as agency owners. Like, if you hire someone and you trust them and they don't ask you questions, they just tell you what you're going to do. That's like the best feeling in the world. Right. And yes, we so often fall into the trap of putting ourselves in a position where, even though we know what we should be doing, we let the client start to take the reins on the relationship, and it doesn't benefit anyone. It's what nobody wants.
Yeah. It's what I call make the logo bigger syndrome.
Indeed. I want to come back to the client side for a moment. Is there anything else that we should know about that surfaced in this research that is important to clients when they're looking at this more strategic kind of relationship?
Well, one of the mistakes we made early on, and it makes sense, but I hadn't really thought about it this way, was that because it's part-time, because it's fractional, a lot of people position it as, oh, this is cheaper. This is, I don't have to pay $370,000 plus benefits, to a full-time CMO. Well, when we really started getting into it, again, we're targeting that small to mid-sized business, $30 to $3 million maybe. And what we pretty quickly realized is they'd never bought marketing at this level, before. So all of a sudden it was actually a huge step up for them. I mean, the companies at that level, especially, my favorite's that $10 to $15 million company that's never done any marketing. I have no idea how they got there. But the founder was pretty good at selling, pretty good telling the story. There was market demand for what they do. And all of a sudden they plateaued and they're like, why are we stuck? And so they go out now starting looking for solutions. And now we come in and find out they're spending they are spending some money on marketing, but it's $30,000, $40,000 a year, maybe in some cases. And now we're saying, oh, you need to actually spend $100,000 on a fractional CMO, and another 150 is what you should be spending, at least on, some of these initiatives. And so from the, agency side, it's actually a much bigger sell in some cases because, the scope of it is so much bigger, and you're in some cases bringing a company that's never had any marketing leadership into, the next stage of their business.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. There's probably some people listening to this thinking like, how the hell do you get to 10 or $15 million? I've seen it. And it's just like they do like direct sales, like cold calls.
Yep.
They build a big SDR team. And then there's this company that nobody even like really knows exists. And they're huge because they just went direct, or they had, some kind of partner relationships, or they're tapped into industry associations. And it's pretty wild to see when you walk in and you're like, wow, you guys have made it so far. And there's basically there's like a website. That's pretty much it. Somebody's nephew is managing the social media, if you're lucky.
We have a recent one that fits that description very, 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 very well. Their whole sales and marketing budget is about $2 million in commission.
Yeah. And you know what? It's like that is the power of focus, I suppose, when you're early on. You find one thing that works and just do the hell out of it. So I want to tie this back to profitability, but before we do that, I want to just talk specifically to the larger firms that are listening to this. How do they think about this information, this positioning of fractional CMO? Like, how does this apply to somebody that has a larger firm and a larger team? What can they draw from this?
Yeah. So I would say about 25% of the folks that on the, the fractional CMO side were in that situation. And I would say that they struggle with this more than, the smaller firm, because they have dedicated resources to things. They need to keep so much lead flow, going for those things because they've got people that are sitting in desks assigned to, certain tasks. Most of them are exploring, it seemed to me, most of them are exploring a fractional CMO offering. So, whereas the smaller firm is like, no, we're leading with that. Like, if you want to hire us, we do this first. And then, then we'll talk about what execution looks like. And what I see the larger firms doing is saying, okay, we've got people on our team that can, act this way as a fractional CMO. Does it make sense for us to have, that $25,000, $50,000 offering that, somebody buys, and I think one of the struggles they have is that's generally those are principals that they're looking at for those roles. And, is that a good use of their time? Do they have to figure out, how to do it? Does it, because if you look at this as selling your time, it's like, you get a fourth of my time, you get a fourth of my time, like some people do. Well, that doesn't scale. And so, I think if you, So that's what we're seeing, at least, that they're saying, okay, yeah, we know we need to get more strategic. We'll offer that as almost like a product. And when the right fit comes along, we'll go all in on it. I don't see them saying we're going to turn the entire ship. And, from this day forward, people are only going to hire us to do, strategy, and then, we'll draw up the plan. But so like anything, it's a pivot or a transition or whatever we call it, the bigger they are, probably the harder it is to find a place for it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've also been seeing some firms kind of doing different versions of moving in this direction. And it takes a couple of different forms, but some of the more successful models that I've seen, a great example of this would be like Impact BND, which some people might have heard of, where they move completely away from execution, and they almost have a coaching relationship with their clients now, which is kind of interesting. And they were at pretty significant scale when they made that shift. It was a big bet that they made, but it seems to have worked out for them, at least from what I can tell. The other thing that I've seen a lot is this internal specialization. And that's really kind of taking the senior most people on the team and then the people that are great with relationships and sales and focusing in on owning strategy, account management, and then actually using third parties to do a lot of the delivery.
Yep.
And of course, that decreases, to your point earlier, this pressure to keep a large team of producers busy internally. And so it kind of changes the posture in a sales process where we're not as concerned about maintaining utilization rates, and we can get really good and efficient at the highest value parts of the client relationship and scale the delivery side of things as needed. So that's something I'm seeing more and more of.
And the folks that we work with in our model is just that. Build account manager, project manager, team, and outsource and have them manage the outsource. And you really can control your scope and your budget. And I mean, we aim for, and I don't know, you have a lot, I'm going right into your field here. We aim for 67% margin on our execution. And our profit or our strategy work is 80-90% in most cases. And so it is a model that I think takes a little work to get flowing and get right and get the right people in the right seats. And you're constantly building third party bench, because they flake out and they do different things. And so you're constantly having to replace folks, but it's a model that we have been pretty successful ourselves, but also teaching people.
Yeah. I mean, your benchmarks align to us. Like, we like to see direct delivery margins of 70% plus kind of across the board when we sell things to clients. And so if you're able to accomplish those kind of margins when you sell stuff and you have significantly less of a utilization focus, then the likelihood that you're going to have great delivery margins on the P&L and you're going to have a strong profit margin on the bottom line is quite high in that circumstance. And
That's right.
The thing I love most about it is if that's your skill set, sales, relationship management, et cetera, and now you don't have the operational drag of having to scale a delivery team. The criticism of this is, well, look at all this revenue that we're giving to third parties, but it's like, that's short-sighted in my mind, because I've seen these firms scale very, very quickly because they just don't have as much shit to scale. They scale the stuff that they're great at. And so it's not that hard for them. And as long as they have somebody who's capable of building out that capacity and the bench, they can move very, very fast. And the margin and the quality of the revenue that they hang on to is really good. And so the most profitable firms that we've ever audited, and we've looked at over 100 in the last few years, all of them have been running this model.
Well, and I think the other thing too is account management, project management, even strategic leadership. It doesn't change that much. Fundamentally, what you're there to do is pretty solid. AdWords, SEO, I mean, that stuff changes every day. And so having somebody who's just focused on that, I think is another key to that.
Yeah. And I think, this is my macro analysis, but like every other industry that has gone through intense maturing, margins going down, you see the same thing happen over and over again. The supply chain gets fragmented, and you have more and more and more pieces to the supply chain that are more and more and more specialized because they have to become experts at operating that little slice of the supply chain just to eke out enough margin to survive. And we're starting to see the same thing in agencies where you have these people really leaning into white label because they're great at operations. That's their skill set. And then the people that are really leaning into the strategy, the relationships, because that's their skill set. And I think that that's like the natural evolution of just about any industry, but we happen to be going through that life cycle right around now, from my perspective, as agencies, especially as all of these things are putting pressure on our margins.
Yeah, the one other piece of research that I often cite is there's a group called Chief Outsiders that it really gets into fractional everything, all the different C-suite, and they did a survey, and over the last 5 years claimed that the fractional CMO role has grown by 60%. So I think it's coming from a pretty small number probably, but I think that, the next 10 years, it's only going to get stronger.
Well, I would love to stay and continue to chat. It's always a pleasure, John, but I know we both have busy schedules to get back to. So for those that want to consume the research and also consume more of your great content and expertise, where should we send them in the show notes to learn more?
Sure. So you find it pretty easily just at ducttapemarketing.com, DUCTTAPE marketing.com. If you want to find the results of a survey plus some I've got a couple of ebooks and things on this whole idea of fractional CMO. It's just dtm.world/growth is another great place to go and pick up some freebies.
Amazing. So we'll make sure that there are links in the show notes. So wherever you're listening to this, just scroll down. They'll be right there. We'll have links to Duct Tape Marketing, the survey, the resources, John's information and socials as well. And with that, John, thank you for coming back. And it's always a pleasure to see you, man.
Well, you are one of the brightest minds in all of marketing, and particularly when it comes to profitably growing an agency. So it's always great to be able to chat with you.
It means a lot coming from you. Thank you, John.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you've ever found yourself thinking, man, I get so much value from this podcast, I wish there was something I could do to return the favor. Well, today's your lucky day because you can leave us a review wherever you're listening to this, and it is incredibly helpful. Of course, if you haven't grabbed a free copy of the Agency Profit Toolkit, go and get that. It's got tons of free resources to help you improve your profitability. If you're looking to get in the fast lane and get help from experts to improve your profitability and measure your most important metrics, then apply for a consultation at Parakeeto.com. We'd love to chat with you and figure out how we can help. With all of that, thank you so much for being a listener, and we will see you on the next episode.